things are happening in some ways so quickly, in some ways very slowly. Like COVID never seems to end, but there's a lot of things happening in the world and in Canada that we need to kind of remember, recall, and remind our viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I think without a doubt, the story of the year, and in fact, the Canadian Press story of the year was the unmarked graves at residential schools across this country. I don't think that there was anything more significant for many viewers and for many Canadians as that event was this year.
Yes, or the announcement. In fact, it wasn't even the announcement. It was the reawakening of the knowledge of Canadian history.
And yeah, and that's not to cut you off, but
No,
like
go
that
for
is that's exactly the thing. I think a lot of people found that this was someone. One of the editors of one of the surveys for the Canadian Press said, it took some of the Canadianness out of Canada. I think it took some of the complacency or some of the willful blinders that we had put on as a general public. Of course, amongst Indigenous communities, there was always a knowing, but this, I think, brought to the forefront that these are children who were taken from their homes, stripped of their culture and their language, and forced into an institution that really didn't care about them at all. And we are, unfortunately, we are bound by that as Canadians.
Well, and so growing up actually was in my own family home that I learned about what happened to Indigenous children, that in some cases they were forcibly removed under government programs from their home. And again, stripped of the culture, their creed, etc. So for me, when this discovery, if you will, of these graves that, of course, had always been there, kind of surfaced, and everybody was like surprised and shocked and horror. I was more concerned. I was surprised actually that people didn't know enough about their history. I'm like, didn't you learn about this?
And I think that has prompted a lot of provinces to consider, at least a lot of parents to petition that more of this be included. A lot of individuals around Canada to say this is something that is important that we teach. But at the same time, I think there was a lot of when it first started coming out, a lot of hesitation amongst Canadians. We're saying this isn't us. This isn't what we do. And yet, like you said, learning from our history, we are actually learning about this or re-engaging with it, I think, on more than just a theoretical abstract concept, but seeing actual physical indications of this actually being something that people are affected by. These are people, right? These are kids. In fact, the newsmaker of the year for the Canadian Press were children who did not return from residential schools. And I think that is entirely poignant and a correct way to view it, is that they did make the error. That's what focuses the human aspect on this charitable institutional evil.
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway, and I've spoken about this issue many times in the past, is it always comes down to parental rights. Don't interfere with the family. Parents get the final say over their kids. This was yet another example, a very major, probably the biggest example of parental rights violation. And not just... We don't want to whitewash history, right? No. Canada has a very spotted history, and I'm not here to, this is our year-end special, and I'm not here to, go through all the black marks. Every country has them. But people need to just take the willful blinders off, as you said, and say, here's yet another example of where wrong was done, and how can we do it better? And
to rectify wrong, you need to recognize that wrong is being done, right? We need to accept that this is what we did. It is not who we want to be. It's not who we necessarily even are intentionally anymore. But we are also a country where we have many instances of unintentional racism or acts that preclude one culture, especially when it comes to Indigenous people.
Well, and it still carries on. Let's pivot for a moment. Some of these unmarked graves were in British Columbia. I want to pivot to British Columbia. There was a lot happening in British Columbia this year.
Flames and floods, BC.
It was like something out of biblical...
It was absolutely, it dominated newswaves for sure, and it continues to. The fires, the village of Lytton, and of course, flooding right now, Abbotsford, and they're still working on getting out of that.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. Yeah. We've got to go to commercial break, and we'll be right back with Nathaniel Dueck in just a few moments.